Hi, good evening, everyone. How you doing? I'm Lee Love, and this is Photo Mentor Question and Answer live Friday evening. And I want to welcome everyone for joining us here. Thank you very much. And if you're on the live session here, you can, of course, ask questions. I'll tell you how that works in just a second. And if you're on the replay, there's still a lot of great information here that you can, I think that you'll enjoy. Okay, so a couple things. Again, the purpose of this question and answer live session is so that new photographers can get a chance to ask whatever questions they want. There's no judgment. There's no question too simple. In fact, I like really simple questions because they make me look really smart. But there's no question too simple. You can ask whatever you want, and I'll do my best to answer it. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you that, and I'll try and find it for next week. Again, so the way you ask a question, by the way, is you go to the comment section in Facebook, and you should be able to do it in YouTube this week as well. I think I got that working. I'm not sure. I haven't tested it yet. But anyway, so what you do is you put a capital Q and a colon, and then your question, and that way my software will filter it, and it'll allow me to display it on the screen. So anyway, again, and thanks for joining us. And so one of the questions I want to answer real quick is, why am I doing this? And I went into this a little bit last week, which was our first session. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, as I mentioned there in the first session, because it's not about me. I don't want to go in about myself and my background. If you want to know all that, I'd be glad to tell you, but this is not about me. But the reason I started this is because I really was frustration, quite frankly. I spent a lot of time trying to help new photographers. I do a lot of one-on-one training, and have for years in the area of lighting and Photoshop and Lightroom and just basic photography. And one of the things I've seen is that when I go on some of these groups and forums, the questions that people are asking are, number one, maybe they're afraid to ask a question because they might get attacked. Number two, a lot of people that are answering the questions don't actually listen to the question. I mean, they'll give an answer, but they're not addressing what the person's asking, and it's very frustrating for me to see that. And then the second thing is, they're not really given real answers. I mean, they'll just make a statement. Oh, look it up on YouTube or Google or whatever. Well, I assume you've already done that, so that's not really an answer. And then, quite frankly, a lot of the answers are just plain wrong. They're myths or they're misconceptions, and they're just repeated over and over. And so that's where my frustration comes from, and that's why I'm doing this, to help new photographers. I really want to see everyone grow as a photographer and enjoy it, get more confidence as a photographer, and also to just frankly enjoy photography a lot more. So anyway, that's kind of the deal there. I have some bunch of other stuff I can talk about, but I'm going to wait on that, I think, and we'll go and just start getting into some of the questions and answers. Let's see if I've got this set up right here. I think so. Okay. So I want to start off by talking about one of my pet peeves, which is gear. I think there are three kinds of people that become photographers, that get interested in photography. I think the first one is someone that's really likes the technology. They're just interested in the technology. They love all the gadgets, the gizmos, and they're drawn by the technical aspects. Especially this was a key aspect when it was film, because there was a lot of chemicals and a lot of process that was on. People were really into the process. But I think that's even grown now that we've looked at digital photography, because it's even easier. And if you're a computer person or have any interest in computers, then photography is just a natural secondary interest. I mean, they're very, very similar. There are computers now, and we're holding in our hands, that are called cameras. So that's the first thing. The second one is my favorite type of person that gets interested in photography, and that's the pure artist. They just get into it because they just love to create. They love art. Maybe they have a background in art, and they just naturally migrate to photography. I know I wouldn't consider myself a true artist. I'd say I'm more of the third category, which is a hybrid, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I loved to draw. I loved art, but I couldn't draw worth a darn. So I found that photography allowed me to still be able to create, come up with ideas in my head, and still convey them through photography. And so I found I have some friends. One friend that I was teaching is a graphic designer, and he didn't really know anything about photography, and he got interested in it, and I started helping him with it, and he became a much better photographer than I was in many areas. He picked it up very, very quickly because he already had that design background. He understood white space, he understood design, he understood the rule of thirds and all the things that go along with that. And so there's a lot of group of people that are just plain artists. The saying is they don't know an f-stop from a bus stop. And the fact is they don't need to. They really, the cameras will do so much nowadays that they're pure artists, and that's all they see is the art. And then there's the third kind of photographer, which is a little more like me. I call that the hybrid. I have one leg in the art aspect of it, and then I have one leg in the technical aspect. That's great. Being that I'm a commercial photographer and I'm really solving problems and I'm having to deal with issues on set. But also it gets in the way because sometimes I really want to focus more on the artistic aspect. So you'll hear me talk a lot about that with new photographers and answering questions about them working on the composition, the framing, the lighting first, and then the technology second. So anyway, so that's the thing about I think that I want to mention. So this focus on gear is a little bit of annoying because I see it everywhere in every group, every forum. People are like, "Oh, you got to get this camera. You got to have full frame versus crop sensor, or you have to have, it's got to have this kind of focusing system or whatever." And I think that's a distraction. I don't know where that switch got flipped, where photographers started playing the role of manufacturers. I expect the manufacturer to tout their features and their specs because they're spent a lot of money in developing this technology. But for some reason, all of a sudden, our fellow photographers now are doing the same thing and they're promoting the technology instead of the art. And so I tell people it's more important to focus on the emotion, on the composition, on the lighting, much more than the gear. And now, let me be completely transparent in that I have lots of gear, okay? I've collected a lot of stuff. I have way more gear than I actually probably need. So I'm not immune from that symptom. They call it GAS, Gear Acquisition Syndrome, by the way. And so it is an issue, and it can be, but the point is that you don't really have to, to deal with that. You should be focusing more on the art. Anyway, as an example, I want to show you an example of that right now, and then we'll get into some of the questions. So here's a picture I want to show you. This is an amazing picture. It was not taken by me. It's taken by Brian Burt, and it's just fantastic. And I've used it before as an example. And the reason is I'd love to do a game here, and you can tell me what kind of camera took this picture. I think it's a really, really well done picture. I think the composition is excellent. I think the color, of course, the saturation is beautiful. So the question is, what kind of camera did take that? Was it a Canon or a Nikon or a Hasselblad or a Leica or whatever? And the interesting thing about it is it was really taken with an iPhone 7 to be exact. So I think this is a good example of where it's not about the technology. It's really about learning to see, about composition, and recognizing a great image. And our phones nowadays are certainly much better than any of the cameras we used to have 20 years ago. But still, learning to see is a very important aspect of this, and I would encourage you to focus on that more so than the technology. So anyway, that's my my rant for this evening, for this week, and we'll see how it goes. All right, so let me look over here for a second. Okay. Yes, so definitely a number of hybrid photographers out there, and it's easy to do, you know. My buddy Al says that he claims that this is a let's see, this is the right one here. He claims that is a that's not it. That's not the right one. That's a fake reflection. Maybe it is. I don't know. It looks pretty darn good. But I don't know if it's a fake one or not. But if it is, it's pretty darn good. And I've got a bunch of other examples. I didn't bring them all out tonight. But I do have a bunch of examples with a bunch of different cameras. I've thought about doing a game show where you have to guess what camera it is. Of course, it'd be impossible to do that. But anyway. All right. So let's see what we got here. So the first question I have. Oh, let me make sure I mention something to you here. The countdown timer that you saw before the show started was done by my friend Billy, and he is offering the full suite of countdown timers at a discount for 35% off for a limited time. So if you're a streamer or you're interested in using countdown timers for some of your projects, he's got them. They come in, and I said it wrong last week. I remember they come in 2-minute, 5-minute, and 10-minute. And then I think there are also maybe one without anything there. You can put your own time in. But anyway, so if you want to check that out, be sure and do that. I'll put this is the link here, but if you can't read it, I will be sure and put that into the into the show notes or into the comment there. Okay, so let's see what we got here. So the first question is from Audrey. And Audrey asks, this is a pretty common question, what tripod would you recommend for a Canon T6, Rebel T6? Okay, so here's the first question, or here's the first question I would ask you when anyone asks me anything about tripods. And the first thing is you got to figure out what's your current camera. Now she's mentioned that it's a T6. A Canon. And then the other question is, what's the longest lens you have? Now, it's probably not a long lens. It's probably maybe a 70-300, one of the kit lenses. But so that's one of the things. I mean, the issue there is capacity. Now, tripods are they're difficult. Okay, and here's the dilemma that you have when you buy a tripod. Number one, we look at them and we go, well, I don't want to spend a lot of money on a tripod. I mean, I'm just going to set the camera on it. It's just going to sit there. And I don't want to spend $200, $300, $400 on a tripod. The problem is, if you consider you have, I don't know, let's say it's a $500 camera. You don't want to put it on a $49 tripod, because I have seen a number of them. Just you'll watch them and then you'll go for it, and there goes the camera over onto the ground, and that's going to cost you a lot more than $49 to get that repaired. So, as most of us have done, I think many of us have gone through the same process. You start off with a cheap tripod, then you add a little better one, and then you add a little better one, and eventually you spend the money, you realize it's worth it, and you end up getting a really good one, and then you never have to buy another one again. I think I'm on my 5th or 6th tripod. And now I'm done. That tripod I've had for over 10 years, and it's carbon fiber, and it's just got the ball head on it alone will support, I think, 88 pounds, which is way more than I would ever need. I could probably almost stand on the thing. But the point is, I know it's rock solid. So the dilemma is, what you're faced with is getting a tripod, number one, that meets your budget. That's always an issue. Number two, one that is portable. Because if you're going to travel with it, or if you're a hiker or something like that, you don't want something that's big, massive studio tripod. You want something small and lightweight. But on the other hand, you got to be careful, because if the legs are too thin or it's too flimsy, then it's going to pick up vibration. And so that's something you want to watch for when you get. So I guess the bottom line is, try and get the best tripod you can afford, and something that's going to be match your style of photography. If you travel a lot, if you're a hiker, then try and get something that can fold up. There's a brand called MeFoto, MEFOTO, and that's a very popular brand. It's relatively low cost. I think they have three kind of categories of product. You can get them in aluminum, you can get them in carbon fiber, and depending on what you want to spend. The other thing I would mention before I move on is, you want the head that goes on you want the quick release plate that goes on the bottom of the camera. And the way that works is that stays on the camera. You can just unscrew it, and it comes right off the camera, so you don't have to keep doing that every time. Sometimes there's a lever, sometimes there's a knob. That quick release plate, I recommend you look at something called an Arca Swiss mount, and the reason is it's a very, very common mount. It's available everywhere. If you lose the plate, you're not going to have to throw away the tripod, or you're not going to be searching all over the place looking for some weird plate made by, Bob's Tripod Company. And so you want to find one that's Arca Swiss. The MeFoto is, a lot of them nowadays, it's pretty much a standard, and you can go anywhere and find a plate if you need one. So anyway, all right. Let's see. Then the other one, let's see what we got here. So we got another question from Veronica. I'm not even going to try and pronounce Veronica's name, because I would embarrass myself, which I do quite frequently, by the way. Okay, so I'm looking to buy a new camera. I had a Canon EOS 600D. Now, 600D is a European model. Probably, I'm going to guess it may be close to a 6D. I'm not sure. Maybe a T7. I have to look that up. And I want to go further. I want to take landscape and nature pictures. Preferably stick with Canon. So this is a common question. A lot of people are either looking for their first camera, or they're looking to upgrade their camera. And so the question is, where do I start? What do I get? Well, that's kind of a tough one, not knowing your budget, but that's the first thing you want to try and figure out is can you spend on your system. The second thing is, keep in mind that a lot of people nowadays will say, buy a used full frame camera. So just real quickly, a full frame camera means that the sensor inside the digital sensor is the exact same size as a 35 millimeter negative. A crop sensor is just a little bit smaller. It's usually 1.5 to 1.6 times smaller. And the reason they do that is because the lenses are less expensive to manufacture, they're lighter, and the cost of the sensor is less. It used to be that, you had to go full frame. If you wanted low light and you wanted the best quality, you really needed to go to full frame. But frankly, the crop sensor technology has gotten so good that it's really hard to tell the difference, depending on your application, of course. And that's all of this. All my recommendations are based on your application. I don't have a lot of information here. I only have a couple of sentences I'm trying to make an assessment on. So without knowing more details, you don't have to go full frame. Full frame is going to be a little more expensive. But the other thing about full frame is that the lenses are going to be more expensive, and they're also going to be bigger and heavier. And that could be a drawback. Again, if you're looking for something to travel with, a big giant lens, full frame lens, may not be what you want to do. If you are looking at doing wildlife type photography, a lot of people will prefer a crop sensor camera, because you actually get effectively, it's not technically this, and I go into this a lot, too much to go into here, but technically you get a little bit longer reach. In other words, an effective focal length. So a 100 millimeter, we'll just pick a number, 100 millimeter on a full frame camera would be 100 times 1.5 or 1.6. So you get a little extra reach. So for people that are doing birding and things like that, they like a crop sensor because it gives them that little extra. It's a field of view is what happens. The field of view gets narrower. The downside, of course, is that if you're doing the opposite, if you're doing landscape and then to get a wide lens, you got to go with a much wider lens. So you have to go 18 millimeter or larger or wider. And so that's the drawback there. So the answer is, first of all, try and go in to a local shop if you can and get your hands on the different models so you can feel what's going on. Look at the menus are going to be pretty much the same if you stick with Canon. But look around, maybe the 6D, I think, is the full frame model. There's, I think, a 6D Mark II. Then there's the mirrorless cameras, which are the EOS R models in RP. And then if you want to stick with the crop sensor, which are great, nothing wrong with that, you can look in the Canon 7D Mark II, which is a great camera, or if you want to say, those are typically almost like a sports camera, high frame rate, but you can also look at the 80D or 70D. Those would be something that would be right around probably in a lower price range depending on the budget that you're looking for. So, okay. Let's see what we got here. All right, so the next question, again, if you want to ask a question, be sure and put a Q in front of your question, post it on Facebook or on Twitter. I'm sorry, not Twitter, on Facebook or on Facebook or YouTube. And I'm not seeing any questions on Facebook. I hope this part is working right. So, but they are working on YouTube, which this is the first week we've done that. So that's a step in some direction. I don't know if it's the right direction, but it is a step in some direction. Let me look at this real quick here before I move on. Okay. Hang on here. Let me just check this real quick. Yeah, here we go. Okay. All right. So the next question is from Deborah, and she says, and this is a sad one. I hate this kind of question because I've seen this before, and it's really tough that she's in this situation. But so she has a new camera, got it. It's been in the closet since Christmas, and she got all excited about it at first, but then she really got overwhelmed with the technology, is what she's really trying to say. And I've seen that a lot. People that get a camera, they'll get a really a quote unquote nice camera. But then they get easily overwhelmed because they go onto forums and the groups and they start asking questions, and people are like, oh, you got to use Photoshop. Oh, you have to do this. Oh, you need this lens or you need that. And without any help, without somebody kind of tutoring you or mentoring, which is the purpose of this show, it's hard. It's very overwhelming. So here's my advice, Deborah. First of all, put the camera on auto. People that tell you you have to shoot on manual do not understand where you are. Manual is a great mode, and it's certainly something you need to know about down the road. But to get started, just put the camera on auto and use it as a really nice point and shoot, if you want to call it that. But focus primarily on your composition. Focus primarily on your lighting. Learn to see, as I call it. So active seeing. That's what really makes a great photographer. Is not so much the technology or the camera, as we saw earlier. It has to do with how you perceive that, what you do with that. And so don't worry about the technology to start with. Just worry about capturing the emotion, capturing the great composition, and that will get you started. And you'll have some success doing that, I promise you. And then as you get better and you say, well, now that I'm getting some good pictures, some ones that I'm satisfied with, now I kind of want to go a little further. I want to explore a little more technology. Maybe I want to blur the background out, that kind of thing. Then you can go from there. But I think what's happening is you've probably taken off too much at one bite, and so you're just a little overwhelmed. So my advice is shoot on auto. Don't listen to people that tell you have to shoot on manual. Don't worry about using Photoshop. You don't need Photoshop. You don't need all those programs, right, to get started. Just worry about capturing the pictures first and work on in interacting with your subject, especially if you're talking about your grandkids. You want to, that's the key, is how do you get emotion? How do you get pictures of them doing something they really enjoy and capture that moment? If you do that, I promise you, the rest of the family members are not going to know what ISO you shot at or care or what camera you shot with. They just want to know, they want to see, oh, that's a great picture. That's definitely looks like Tommy, for example. So that would be my advice. Okay. Let's look here and, okay, so we've got a couple of questions. This one says, let me go back here. Okay, so this question says, what focal length will you suggest for landscape and also for street photography? Actually, I think this is one we asked before. Not tonight, but once before. So I'll answer it anyway. So the answer is, so if you want, it's kind of twofold. A street photography lens is typically around a 28, 23 millimeter, depending on if it's a crop sensor or a full frame sensor. And so it's usually a little bit wider. And the same thing for landscape. Now, a landscape, you can kind of cheat by not having such a super wide lens. You can actually shoot multiple images and combine them in a panorama, and that will help, that'll get you more of a wider shot, higher resolution, without actually having to have a wide angle lens. So, okay. Let's see here. So again, if you have questions, be sure and put a Q with a colon in front of it, and so that we can pull this down here. Okay. Next question is, let's see here. We did Deborah. Okay, next question. Oh, here we go. So what's the best photo editing app? From Danielle. Well, Danielle, there isn't one. There's a lot of them is the problem. There's a whole bunch of them. Once again, this is kind of a topic that is a little bit of a sore spot for me, because I see a lot of people recommending you got to know Photoshop. And let me tell you, Photoshop's an amazing application. I've been using it since it was version 2.5. So I've been teaching it for 20 years, and I've been using it for 20 years. And it's a great, great product. But my analogy is it's like trying to kill an ant with a hammer. I mean, it does a lot of stuff. You don't need all that. And so there's a number of programs you can use that will get you to allow you to do editing without having to use Photoshop. The other thing about Photoshop is that it's a subscription model. So you're kind of renting the software. So if you're not sure that's the product you want or that you're going to be using, then you're going to be paying for it. And you can get out of it, but I hear it's a little bit difficult. And so what I would recommend is, number one, look at the programs that the manufacturer produces. So if you want to just get started simply, Nikon makes a product, Canon makes a product, I'm sure Sony makes a free software product as well. You can download those products. They usually come with the camera, or you can download them from their website, and they'll let you edit their files and start doing some basic editing. The things that you're going to want to edit, and again, depending on how sophisticated you're getting, and I'm assuming you're just starting out, would be you want to change the white balance. So maybe the color temperature is not quite right. Maybe there's mixed lighting conditions. Maybe you want to warm it up a little bit to add some mood to it. You might want to sharpen the picture a little bit, and you may want to adjust the contrast, maybe the saturation. So it's not a lot unless you're doing compositing where you're putting multiple images or removing objects from the or adding objects to an image. You don't really need all that. So that would be my first recommendation. The second recommendation is if you do want to go subscription model, look at Lightroom. And then the other one that I like right now is called Luminar 4. And Luminar is a program you buy at one time and that's it. And it's got some amazing capabilities. It's kind of a cross between Photoshop and Lightroom, actually. Or Photoshop and Lightroom, because it has layers, which Photoshop has, but Lightroom does not. You can remove objects, which is a little harder to do in Lightroom. You can do it in Photoshop a little easier. And it even has some artificial intelligence capabilities. It's called Luminar 4. It's made by a company called Skylum. And I'll try and remember to put the link in the comments. And it will, artificial intelligence will allow you to go and replace the sky, for example. Just click on it. There's a whole bunch of skies you can click, and it does an amazing job. I'm very impressed at how well it works. I don't know how they do it. And then the other thing it has is a retouching, AI retouching for facial retouching. So if you want to remove some blemishes and things like that. The nice thing I like about it is that it doesn't overdo it. There's some other products like Portrait Professional and things like that that are really great for doing retouching. But unless you go in and start dialing down the settings, they tend to overdo it. And they tend to make you look like a China doll. And so that's the problem with using a product like that. So Luminar 4 is the product made by a company called Skylum, SKYULUM, and .com. And I'll post a link on that. Okay, let's see here. Okay. The next question is, okay, super dumb question. I love these, by the way, from Amy. And she says, what's the difference in a regular DSLR versus mirrorless? Again, very common question. People assume that you know the difference. And it's more than just the way the light comes in through the viewfinder. There's a lot more going on there. But Amy, the differences are, the simple answer is that a DSLR has a mirror. And so what happens, the light comes in through the lens, hits that mirror, bounces up, goes through a prism, and then comes in through your eyepiece. So you can look at that, magnifies that, so you can your eyepiece. So that's the essence, the simple answer. But there's more going on. So in a mirrorless camera, there is no mirror, obviously, hence the name mirrorless. And what that does is the light just comes straight through the lens and hits the back of the sensor, hits the sensor in the back of the camera. And then that is electronically projected on a little screen inside the viewfinder. So you're looking at an electronic representation of what the camera is seeing. Now, my personal opinion is it depends on what I'm shooting. If I'm photographing people, I still prefer a DSLR because I want to look at their eyes and I want to see exactly what's going on, and I can go either move my eye away from the viewfinder or look at it, and I am seeing instantly what's going on with that person's expression. With a mirrorless camera, can be a little bit of a lag. Nowadays they've gotten much, much better, but I'm looking at a screen now, and so the problem is it's a screen, it's a representation, it's a monitor, it's not looking at the actual through what's the camera seeing. Now on the plus side, the plus and minus of that is some people, especially when they're starting out, really like mirrorless cameras because when you make an adjustment on the exposure, you can set the camera up so that the exposure will change in the viewfinder. So you can see real time what the exposure is going to look like. Maybe the more experience you get, it's not as big of a deal, but some people like that. The other thing is there's some features that you can gain with a mirrorless camera. You can get them with a DSLR, like Nikon has this with the D850 and some of their higher-end cameras, but they're things like focus peaking. So in other words, what happens is when you're looking at the back of the screen, instead of just looking at the focusing, the picture will change color. Whatever's in focus will actually change color. So you'll see red or green or blue. You can set it whatever you want. As you move the focus point, you'll see that change in the image. So if the background's in focus, and you'll see it change to a red or a green. If the foreground's in focus, then that'll change to a red or green or blue, whatever you set it to be. So there are some things that are nice. Now, I use both. I use mirrorless and DSLR. Like I said, I prefer a DSLR when I'm photographing people, but I use mirrorless when I'm shooting video. And again, for video, I don't care. It's going to be on an electronic screen anyway. That's where your people are going to view it. It's not going to be chances are it's not going to be a print. Well, it won't be a print. It's not going to be a print. It's not anything like that. And so therefore, I don't care that I'm looking at it on the back of a screen. In fact, the features, having the histogram and the focus peaking can be an advantage. There's also something called false color anyway, blah, blah, blah. So the point is that those are some of the biggest differences. Now, the other thing that most people won't tell you, and this is starting to change a little bit, but it's still not quite there, and that is the cost. The cost of mirrorless cameras are still more expensive than DSLRs. You can get a entry-level Nikon D3500, goes on sale quite often for $396 with a lens. And for another $100, you can usually get a second lens. Same thing for Canon. I don't know that you could find a new mirrorless camera in that price range. They're generally $800-900 to start. Unless you're talking about a point and shoot. Of course, a point and shoot is really was an original mirrorless camera, so nothing new about that. So anyway, let me look here. Let's see if I've got any other questions in here. Okay. All right. Hope that answered your question, Amy. So the next one is from Paige. And Paige wants to know, what is the best way to email client photos while keeping the quality? So I'm going to assume you're talking about finals, because proofs can be a little different. I mean, you don't really care about the quality when you're sending them a proof sheet. But I will talk about that real briefly. Now, I don't generally do consumer work. All my work is commercial, so I'm usually working with companies. My proofing process is one I use a print to PDF, and there's 4 pictures on a screen on a page, my logo in the middle, and I have a cover sheet that says these are not final images, they're not retouched, they're not color corrected, they're not representing what the image will look like. And that's the proof sheet. And the reason I do that is because in a company, people can forward that email around all over the place. It's not a big file, and they can look at them. So if I'm photographing multiple people, or there needs to be approval process from a large number of people, it's easy for them to pass that around and be able to do that. But as far as delivery of images, some people use Dropbox, some people use Google's Drive, Microsoft Drive. Again, personally, I find those products annoying, especially Dropbox, which seems to be the most popular. Somebody here's sending me messages. Oh, cool. Send a photo. Okay, I'll check. Someone said I'm not getting their questions. I'll double check and make sure that I am. And that's entirely possible. So though I find those products annoying, because what happens when someone sends me a Dropbox link, I have to go to the Dropbox link. I then I have to chances are I have to have an account on some of these systems, even though it's free. And sometimes there's a limit. I've had people send me something when I log in, it says, "Oh, you don't have enough space on your system." So it's just I don't particularly care for the way that works. I use a system I recommend called Hightail, Hightail. The way that system works, and I'm sure there's other ones. WeTransfer is another one. I think that's free. The way it works is I can upload all the images, and then it just sends them an email link. and then they get the email link, and then when they follow the email link, they can see the images, and they can download high res image. I think I can put up to a single file of 2 gigabytes file on there, and I can put multiples of those on there. So if I'm doing video, I also use the same service for displaying video stuff or downloading video. And so that's the system I use, and I prefer that because as long as they have email, then they can go to the site and download. They don't have to have an account. They don't have to log in. They don't have to do any of that stuff, and it just makes it a whole lot easier. Okay, so let me see real quick here if I can figure out why I'm not getting any questions from Amaza. View queue. Nope, that's not it. View all of them. Hang on here. Stand by. Apologize for this. This is the problem with doing live, as we all know. Okay, so I know I'm going there. I know I'm finding them from there. Finding post. Timeline pictures is in. Let's try this, see if this works. Sorry about this. Need some standby music, huh? Let's see. So the other one is, I'm sure this is in the right spot. Aha. Nope. Okay, so I'm finding them on YouTube. Again, I apologize for the delay here. And I see they're there. Question answer. Let's try this one. See if this is. Oh, there we go. There we go. Got it. Oops. Of course, now I probably changed it and I messed it up. Was there. I saw them. Let's try this again. See if this refreshes. All right, I'll answer another question while I'm working on this and see if I can figure out what's going on here. Okay, so another question is, let's see, so that was the super dumb question. It's not super dumb at all, by the way. It's a great question. Okay, here's another one that I get quite often and that I like to get. Let's see, this is perfect. Questions. Post your questions. Sorry, I'm seeing some of this stuff now. Okay, so the question is, what is a lens hood? What do they do? And will it make the outcome of my photos any better? Well, I don't know if it'll make the outcome of your photos any better, but I will tell you that I definitely recommend them and you should be using one, and I'll tell you why. The reason you should, so I always use a lens hood, okay? Indoor, outdoor, whatever. And the purpose of a lens hood, what it does is it keeps any reflections off the front of the glass. So the larger the lens, let's say a wide angle lens, or maybe a lens that's got a very wide aperture, 2.8, something like that, has a very large opening. So it's a big surface. So any light that hits the front of that lens can diminish the contrast. Analogy would be maybe you're driving down the road, sunlight hits your windshield, and you can kind of have trouble seeing, right? It's kind of the windshield's kind of all washed out. It's kind of a dramatic example, but that is exactly the same thing that happens. So a lens hood will prevent that from happening. The other thing is that it will also protect the lens. So if you have that on and you're carrying it around and you bump into something, that lens hood is going to be a little larger. It's going to protrude, and the camera's going to hit, or the object's going to hit that before it's going to hit the lens. So if you break a lens hood, they're not cheap. I mean, some of them are $30, $40 or more. But at least it's going to be a lot less expensive than repairing a lens. So you want to be able to, so I recommend you always use a lens hood. Now, the newer models, and I say newer, last 15, 20 years or so probably, have a bayonet mount. So the old style screwed on. They don't do that anymore. What happens is a lens hood is now specific to a lens. So it goes on and it clicks in place. And sometimes you may notice, I don't know if I have one here, you may notice that they have like slots cut out in the edges of them. Well, that is on purpose. That has to line up exactly right so that it doesn't vignette. So you don't see the lens hood in the corners when you're zoomed all the way out. So that's why the lens hoods are primarily made for a specific lens. The other cool thing, though, is now because they have this bayonet mount, you can take that lens hood off. A lot of people don't really realize this. You can reverse it, and you can put it back on top of the lens and put it in place, and so it collapses it, so to speak. So now when you put it in your camera bag, it takes up a lot less space. So that's the purpose of a lens hood. Definitely should use them both for keeping reflections off the front of your glass, but also in protecting the lens. Okay, let's see here. I'm seeing some questions, but I'm not sure these are new ones. Image stabilization, that's not new. Hang on here, let's see. So that was the bummer that I can't find. I know they're not timeline photos. Let me see, just trying to. Okay, so I got a couple more here we'll pick up. All right, so the next one is email lens hood. Okay. So this next question is a good lens to use on my Nikon D7200 for indoor newborn pictures. So, first of all, I've photographed a lot of stuff. I've done a lot of different kinds of photography, but newborns is not one that I've ever done a lot with. I've actually taught newborn lighting photography or lighting for newborns, but not actually photographing newborns. So that's kind of interesting. The lens you're looking for, again, indoors. You should be using lighting. If you're not using artificial lighting, then you want to be near a window somewhere so you can get that light coming, a nice soft light coming through a window. You want to make sure there's like a drape or some kind of sheer fabric to make that light source very large. Okay, I think I might got some of these questions now. And you also want to make sure that that you probably are going to, because you're not moving around or you're not going to be very far from the subject, the baby, you probably can get away with a prime lens, meaning a non-zoom. So I would say a 50 millimeter, depending on if you have a crop sensor or a full frame. But even if it's crop sensor, full frame full frame, 50 millimeters is a good focal length. I like 85. That's kind of my favorite lens for doing portraits and stuff like that. But it might be a little long if you're trying to get close. Keep in mind that the wider the lens, the closer you have to get to the subject, the more distorted the picture is going to be. So even a 50 millimeter lens, believe it or not, can add some distortion. And so even though that's not a wide angle lens, it's not as flattering to the subject as a 85 would be, or a 105 even. So that's the problem there, is you kind of want to be using a slightly longer lens. You may have to back up a little bit, but that would be one way of doing it. And so I would say maybe a 50 millimeter lens could be something that you would work. And I'm going to look at this real quick here. Let me see. All right, so I'm not seeing the questions for some reason show up on the screen, but that's okay. So we can answer them anyway. Hey, listen, if it's one thing I've learned as a photographer It is to think on your feet. That's part of our job. Is to, you always run into a situation where things don't work, or you forgot something, or broken, or whatever. So the key is, how do you make it work even though you don't have everything you need? Okay. All right. So, question is, I struggle getting sharp pictures. Do I have to only select middle focus point or all of them because automatic focus doesn't give the sharpness I'm looking for? Great question. Okay. So here's the deal with the focusing, and this is something that a lot of people aren't aware of. Keep in mind that focusing is only in this kind of plane. Okay, it's not in this way. So it's either you're either focused here or you're focused here. So what happens in an automatic focusing system, or even group focusing, but primarily automatic focusing, it's jumping around looking for contrast. It's trying to figure out what's the most important part of the subject, of the frame. So what will happen is, if you're not careful, it will grab the background, and it'll focus on the background instead of the foreground. So what I like to do, and again, it depends on what you're shooting. You didn't really Amaza, you didn't really mention what you were shooting, but if it's just to say it's people, family, that kind of thing, you might want to mention that. Then I like to shoot single point focus, where I lock the focus in. Usually most cameras will let you move that focus point around, and then I focus on the eye, and then I recompose. So even if it's in the center, it doesn't matter, but because I'll put it in the focus, I'll lock it in, and then I'll move. So the way it works is, if you're on single, let's see, on a Canon it's called AI focus, I think. And on the Nikon it's called AFS for single focus. So what happens is, when you push on either way, and the way it works is, when you push the button down halfway, it locks the focus. So you focus on the eye, on the single point, you lock that in, you hold it halfway, you recompose, and then you shoot. Now, I don't know about the Canon. On the Nikon, one of the nice features on a lot of the models, under the playback menu, you can turn on what data is displayed from the image. Your EXIF data, what was shot at, the lens, all exposure, that kind of stuff. But also, there's something on there called focus point, and if you turn that on, when you look at the image, it'll show you a square of where the camera actually focused. So if you're missing the focus, that's a great way to look at that and tell. If you don't have that capability, then again, I'd still recommend you do a single point focus, figure out where you want it to focus, lock it, and then recompose. Hopefully that answered your question. He mainly shoots landscape. Okay, so landscape's a little different. And this is something that it's a little too go into here, but there's something called, and I always forget the name of this, and I don't understand why I do. It's not near field. Oh God, I have a mental block against this terminology. But anyway, here's the way it works. I can explain it to you. You can call it whatever you want. When you focus on a subject, let's say you're focused on this remote. If you focus on this remote, what people don't realize is that there's also some in front of the object that's in focus, and some of the rear in focus. So what most people will do is, most landscape photographers will focus out here instead of on this object, because they know that this is going to be in focus, this is going to be in focus, and generally they're using a small aperture and infinity focus, so everything on past it's going to be focused as well. But they'll generally focus 1/3 of the way in. So if you're here and this is your subject, they'll focus 1/3 of the way into the frame, and that's where they focus, or into the picture, and that's where they focus at. So if you're not getting sharp pictures, it could be vibration. Make sure, if you're not using a tripod, make sure you're shooting at a shutter speed that's fast enough to freeze the action. And believe it or not, even hand holding a lens, almost any lens. Well, here's the point. You can take the most inexpensive lens and put it in the middle range, let's say f8, f11, and put it on a tripod, and I will almost guarantee it will be sharper than a lens you've handheld, even at the same aperture. Definitely a wider aperture. And so that's the trick. So here again, here's my rule of thumb. If it's a 50 millimeter lens, then you need to be shooting at least the focal length or double in shutter speed. So you want to be shooting at 1/60 if you're hand holding it, 1/60th of a second, or ideally 1/25th or faster. If it's a 300 millimeter lens, which is probably not for landscape, but it could be, then you want to be shooting at 300 or preferably 1/640th or 1/800th of a second shutter speed, and that will help ensure that you're going to get a sharp picture. When people bring me cameras and they go, my camera was working, but now I think there's a problem with the lens, I'd say 99% of the time it's because the shutter speed is too slow. Okay. He also asked the question, do I need a UV filter for landscape? Probably not. Here's the issue with UV filters. If you do get a UV filter, you want to match the quality of the lens. So if you have a $2,000 professional 70 to 200 2.8 lens, and you want to use a good filter on it, don't use a cheap filter. In fact, my approach is, take this for what you want, I'd rather not have a filter on it at all if I got to put a cheap one on. And the reason is I've seen situations where they're getting soft images and it's the filter. So if that may be a problem for you, if you're finding that you're not getting sharp images, then try to take the filter off, shoot an image, and then put the filter back on, shoot the exact same image. Ideally, you want to do it on a tripod so everything stays the same, and see if that's the problem. But it could be the filter is causing you a problem. Also, sometimes if it's not a really good filter and it's not what they call multi-coated, then you'll get some reflections in between the lens and the filter, and that can cause some answered. I think that's it. I apologize that I missed these earlier. Sorry, I wasn't getting your questions. I think that's it. Anything else you have for a question there? Again, put them in the comment section on YouTube or on Facebook, and I will answer them here. A photo, no problem. Okay. All right. Looks like that is about it. Let me check one more time here. I still don't understand. I got to figure out why this our questions weren't showing up this week. I think I know why, but it could be probably operator error, of course. It's always the problem, right? Okay. All right. Well, let's see. Let me see. I got one more question, I think, here available. D7200. The other question I have here is, let's see. Oh, that's not it. Oh, Jessica, we already answered that. Was about the lens. So a 50 millimeter or an 85 millimeter would be a really good lens, and you don't need anything super fast, although most people will recommend, you got to have a 1.8 or 1.4. I mean, that's going to be helpful, but keep in mind that the depth of field, how much information's in focus, is not just about the aperture. It also has to do with how close you are. So the closer you get, the shallower the depth of field. So even if you're shooting at 3.5 or 5.6, if you get real close, your depth of field may be relatively shallow. And so that can sometimes be an advantage. It can kind of be airy look, but it also may not be what you're looking for. So anyway, let's see. One last check here for questions. I think that's it. Well, listen, I appreciate everybody that came out and asked questions. Again, if you want to follow us here on Facebook, please go to Facebook/photomentor.tv. If we're on Instagram at Photo Mentor TV. And the website is photomentor.tv. Hey, what a surprise, right? And again, we're going to be releasing some more information. I've got some documents, some free documents and guides that I'm working on. If you go to photomentor.tv and you put your email address in there, I'll send those to you as soon as they are available. Again, thanks everybody for joining me, and we'll see you next week. Same time, same station.